Hey everyone, welcome to the video. This one we're going over my core plays for week 9 of the NFL season on Draftkings. Before we continue though, if you could leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out and I really appreciate it. We're getting close to 3K subs and that is awesome, so thank you guys for all the support on here. Hopefully we can hit that soon. And if you want to follow me on Twitter for some reason, I'm at ChrisPennell16, just how my name's spelled with 16 at the end. And if you're interested in the spreadsheets about every single week for the NFL season, projected ownership, stats, projections, cheat sheet, my Slack chat, and all that good stuff. Wide receiver versus cornerback matchups, all that. Links below in the description below for my Patreon, and I also do NBA every single night as well. So anyway, that's enough plugging. I say we get right into the video, and we're going to start off with the quarterback position. And my favorite quarterback of the week is Matthew Stafford. He was in my first look video, and I'm still liking him as of right now. I know this video is out a lot later in the week, but I'm really busy with NBA, and I just have more time to do research at this point of the week, so it's probably a better video quality wise anyway, so just have more time to research stuff and get projected ownership out and all that. So anyway, Matthew Stafford 6,800 versus Oakland. This is my favorite game of the week, and it's my favorite quarterback of the week. We have a 50.5 point over under, which is tied for highest on the slate with the right up there with the Buccaneers and the Seahawks. And with no Kerryon Johnson, they're gonna have to rely heavily on the passing game, and Stafford's already averaging 300 yards passing per game, and I think we see another stellar outing from Matthew Stafford. Oakland is giving up 25.1 points per game to quarterbacks this season, which is second most in the NFL, and they're also 29th DVOA versus the pass, so they're just a really, really bad pass defense. We saw Aaron Rodgers and Deshaun Watson just have really good games versus them, and Matthew Stafford, he's a quality quarterback, and he's got some quality weapons, so I think he can just continue the trend there. Oakland is also giving up 300 yards passing per game and 2.7 touchdowns per game, which leads the league. They've actually given up 19 passing touchdowns on the season, which is third most, and they've had a bye week so far, so that just goes to show how bad their pass defense is this season. Matthew Stafford should have an excellent game here, and I would load him up in all formats. On the other side of this game, we have Derek Carr at 5,500 and versus going up against Detroit, and this is just the cheaper option of opposite of Stafford in the same game, which is my favorite game of the week. Like I said, 15.5 point total. And as the Raiders are actually 2-point favorites, and they have the 26.25 team total. So points are going to be scored on the Raiders, and I want some pieces of it. Detroit is giving up 23.4 points per game to quarterbacks, which is sixth most in the NFL. Detroit is 26th DVOA versus the pass, and giving up over 300 yards passing per game and 2 touchdowns per game. We just saw Daniel Jones light these guys up as well. Oakland has PFF's #1 offensive line versus defensive line pass blocking matchup of the week also, so Derek Carr should be able to sit back, hit his throws, should have time to throw, which I love having my quarterbacks, so I don't want them under pressure. And spending down at quarterback this week allows us to fit in some stud running backs that are now priced to the moon. I think we're going to have to pay up for some running backs this week, so we need to find value somewhere, and I'm liking quarterbacks and I'm liking tight ends as my values this week, and defenses. So Derek Carr, he would make a lot of sense. You just get exposure to that game I love, and he doesn't break the bank either, and he's got some upside as well. And then the last quarterback is a more expensive option in Russell Wilson at 7,100 versus Tampa Bay. We have a 15.5 point over/under, which again is tied for highest on the slate. So I like my quarterbacks in a high over/under games more so than not. It's a 28 point team total, which is the highest on the slate for the Seattle Seahawks. Tampa is 26th DVOA versus the pass and first DVOA versus the run. So this should lean towards a pass heavy attack for the Seahawks. Although I know they don't pass a ton, but just relative to their usual. So they should be able to they should be looking to pass on this team, as teams have done all season. Even Ryan Tannehill had 3 touchdowns last week. Tampa is giving up 23.4 points per game to quarterbacks, which is 7th most in the NFL. They've allowed 4 300-yard passers already this season, and they're giving up on average 300 yards per game. And with everyone spending up for running backs this week, Russ could go overlooked, and I like the idea of a low-owned Russ in tournaments. For cash games, I'm probably going to be going either Stafford or Derek Carr right now to save some extra salary, but in tournaments, GPPs, whatever, I think Russell Wilson's a pretty fine play, and you can pair him up with some of his weapons, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then I also think Jameis Winston is a fine play too. So if you don't want to spend all the way up for Russell Wilson, you could get the same. You could stay in the same game and get Jameis Winston on the other side, who tends to put up big fantasy games. It just looks ugly while he's doing it. He's going to turn the ball over a lot, but usually at the end of the day, sometimes you're pretty happy with Jameis Winston. You can put up some big yardages and hopefully get into the end zone a few times with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and either Cameron Braid or whatever. All right, so on to the running back position. Christian McCaffrey at 10K versus Tennessee. I almost didn't even make a little slideshow of Christian McCaffrey. I was just going to say, yeah, you can play him, but I thought I'd put him in here anyway, just in case. So he's just the volume king. He's averaging 27 touches per game, which leads the entire NFL. He has heavy involvement in the passing game, too, with 7 targets per game. And the Titans aren't a bad defense, but they are allowing the second most receptions per game to running backs, and that's right in CMC's wheelhouse, so he should be able to eat here despite the tougher matchup on paper. And really, matchups really don't matter to me with him either, because he's had back-to-back stellar performances versus Tampa Bay and San Francisco, who are two of the best run defenses in the NFL, and it did not stop him. So Christian McCaffrey, if you can afford him, which I try to make him a priority in cash games, because I do think he's going to be high-owned despite the high price tag, because there's enough value to get it done. If I don't have Christian McCaffrey in cash, I'm probably going to be a little sweaty during the games. Maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. But Christian McCaffrey, I think he's one of the top options on the slate for sure, despite the high price tag at $10K. Then Dalvin Cook at 9,500 versus Kansas City. If you can't afford both in cash games, I would try to get them both in. I know it's extremely difficult, but if you have to pick one between McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook, just in general, I like Dalvin Cook, but I am scared of fading that high ownership in Christian McCaffrey in cash games. But just myself, I like Dalvin Cook the most on this slate. He's 9,500 versus Kansas City, and really just volume. That's what I love out of my running backs. He's averaging 23.75 touches per game, which is third most in the NFL, only behind CMC and Fournette. He's been extremely efficient with his touches so far this season, averaging 5.28 yards per carry, which is only behind Nick Chubb of qualified running backs with over 100 rushing attempts, or like 90 or something like that. Enough rushing attempts, just so it's not like 5 rushing attempts and it's way out of whack. But anyway, his floor game this year was 13 versus Philly, which is obviously one of the best run defenses in the NFL, and he still got double-digit points. And Kansas City is 30th DVOA versus the run. That's absolutely awful. And they're also allowing 32.7 points per game to running backs, which is most in the entire league. So that's also awful. Not awful for Dalvin Cook, but just awful for their defense. It's amazing for Dalvin Cook. And Minnesota also has the number one offensive line versus defensive line run blocking matchup of the week. Points are going to be scored in this game. I think Dalvin Cook is an excellent play. Honestly, he's my RB1 of the week, and Christian McCaffrey is my RB2, even though my projections have Christian McCaffrey projected higher, but that's just for obvious reasons. If you had to pick one, I'm taking Dalvin Cook at 500, just 500 cheaper. If you can fit both in cash games, I think that would be awesome. I know that's difficult to do, but if you can find the value for it, I think that's the way to go for cash. And then hopefully Jalen Samuels ends up being the starter, and then we can just, get a really cheap 3-down running back as well. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Then the next guy I want to talk about is Nick Chubb at 7,300 versus Denver. So we get a little bit of salary relief as a workhorse back. And again, volume. That's what I want out of my running backs in cash games. I do not want to take unnecessary risks in cash games. In GPPs, yeah, you can take some flyers and guys in timeshares. But for cash games, I need the workhorse back, and that's what Nick Chubb is. He's averaging 23 touches per game, which is 6th most in the NFL. He has the best yards per carry of all qualified running backs this season. Like I just said, Dalvin Cook was second. Nick Chubb is first. And he leads all running backs in rushing yards per game. And the Browns have went from slight dogs to 3-point favorites with the news of Joe Flacco. And with Baker's struggles this season, they should look to grind it out with Nick Chubb to win this game. I think he sees a heavy workload, should get over 25 touches in this game, and I think Nick Chubb has a pretty good game. Now, Denver has been pretty darn good versus the pass. They're allowing the fewest points allowed per game to wide receivers this season, but they're more middle of the road versus the run, and we've seen some running backs have some pretty good games versus them. I know Leonard Fournette had over 200 yards, so Nick Chubb, I think he can get you over 100 yards. Hopefully he falls into the end zone one or twice. The Browns should be winning this game, so they should be able to control the clock here and just use Nick Chubb. Hopefully you get a heavy workload here, which, most likely you will. So Nick Chubb, he makes a ton of sense to me at 7,300. I think he's a pretty interesting pivot off the two top dogs. Now, I wouldn't mind pairing Nick Chubb with one of the two top guys, because I know it's really difficult to play McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook together. So if you want to go someone like McCaffrey and Chubb, or maybe Dalvin Cook and Chubb, I think that's fine too, because I don't think you're going to be able to fit McCaffrey, Cook, and Chubb unless you're punting mostly every other spot. But if you can, hey, go for it, because I think they're all three excellent plays. And now we get to a little bit of a cheaper option here with Josh Jacobs at 6,500. And if you guys are new to the channel, I've talked about Josh Jacobs a lot this year. He's one of my favorite running backs. I think he's just really good. And I want all the pieces of this game for fantasy, and I think Jacobs gets a little bit overlooked here because everyone's going to be spending up for running back this week. And then if Jalen Samuels becomes available as a starter at 4K, well, I don't think Jacobs is going to have any ownership, and everyone's going to like the passing game in this game, which obviously I do too. I just think Jacobs might go a little bit overlooked here, and I think that might be a mistake. He's getting nearly 18 carries a game, which is 9th in the NFL, and he's seeing involvement in the passing game as well. Not like a ton, but he's still seeing about 2 targets per game. Detroit is allowing 32.5 points per game to running backs this season, which is 2nd most in the NFL, and over 100 yards and a touchdown on the ground per game too. And Detroit is 19th DVOA versus the run, and he's a home favorite, which I always love for my running backs. He's not a huge home favorite or anything, but he's still a home favorite nonetheless. And Josh Jacobs got talent. He's a little cheap here. I'm not saying he's too cheap. I think he's priced probably correctly, but it's a really good matchup versus Detroit. Running backs continue to have great games versus them, so if Josh Jacobs, he makes some sense for me this week for sure. Probably not a cash game option, but I think GBP more likely. Then we have Le'Veon Bell at 7,700. Now, he's not been great this year at all, or efficient in the slightest, but he's 8th in the league in touches per game at 21.43, and like I said, I always like volume out of my running backs, so we have that right there. The Jets are actually favorites for once in this matchup versus Miami, only 3-point favorites versus Miami, but still a favorite nonetheless. Miami is giving up 32 points per game to running backs this season, which is 4th most, and Miami's 31st DVOA versus the run, and allowing over 140 rushing yards per game. So that's absolutely awful. Good for Le'Veon Bell. And if he can't get it done this matchup, it's probably time to jump ship for us for fantasy purposes, because this is like one of the best matchups you can ask for. And plus, the Jets should be juiced up after all the trade deadline rumors, and Le'Veon Bell wasn't happy with it. I'm sure Robbie Anderson was happy that he was back on the team, but obviously I'm sure they didn't like their names being thrown around like that. And then Jamal Adams as well. He's very upset. He actually ended up on the injury report. We'll see how that goes. And Le'Veon Bell also said he was pretty upset. Not pretty upset. He was just a little bit upset with his lack of touches recently. I just saw that report before I made this video. I didn't really get to read into it. But that was the headliner, so maybe we get a squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of narrative going there. It's a good matchup for it. So Le'Veon Bell, I think he makes some sense too at 7,700. A little bit pricey, but it's a really good matchup, and you get volume. And he's a talented running back as well. He's just not on a very good offense whatsoever. So that's going to be it for the running backs. Now, I should say, Jalen Samuels, if he becomes the starter, he is probably the lock of the week. He's only 4K, I believe, right on the dot, and he's going to be the 3-down back. He's going to get a ton of touches. The Steelers running back has always been pretty valuable for the past however long. So Jalen Samuels, he is a lock and load play if he ends up being the starter. I know Pro Football Doc said he thinks James Conner can play even without practicing, but he hasn't practiced, which is always worrisome. So we will see. But like I said, if he's the starting running back, load Jalen Samuels up. Then Mark Walton's also an interesting cheap option as well versus the Jets, who have not been that great versus running backs this season. I just hate playing Miami players. All right, so let's go to wide receivers now. And this is probably going to be a spend down spot for me this week, but I do want to talk about Kenny Golladay at 7,700 versus Oakland. If I love Stafford, I have to like his number one guy in Kenny G. He exploded last week in a friendly matchup versus the Giants, where he had 32 fantasy points and gets another good one this week. Oakland is giving up 42 points per game to wide receivers, which is 6th most in the NFL. And this should be a high scoring back and forth game with a high Vegas total and the close spread. And the lines are also dogs, which I like, because the Ravens, the Lions should be having to throw the ball quite a bit, which they already do. And Oakland has 29th DVOA versus the pass, and they're giving up nearly 200 yards receiving to receivers this season so far, which is one of the worst in the league. He's also 3rd in air yards for all receivers on the slate, and he has big play upside. So Kenny Golladay, if you are spending up, I think he's a fine option. Now, I would not do this in cash games because I am prioritizing running backs, but I think in GBPs, Kenny G with Matthew Stafford, run it back with someone on the Raiders, I think that's a pretty good stack this week. And speaking of bringing it back with a Raider, we have Tyrell Williams at 5,900, who's one of the guys I'd want to do that with. He's been great in every single game he's played so far this season. He scored no less than 11 points, and he scored a touchdown in each and every single game. Him and Carr make a very affordable stack with upside in my favorite fantasy game of the week. Detroit is giving up 38 points per game to wide receivers, which is 9th most in the league. I realize I have 9th right there, but whatever. But he has big play upside as well with his 41% share of the team's air yards and an A-dot of 15 yards. And he does make a really good correlation play with either Carr or running it back with a Stafford / whoever receiving option you want to use with Stafford stack. So Tyrell Williams, I think it makes a lot of sense this week. I think he's going to have some ownership, but deservedly so. He was in my first look video. So Tyrell Williams, he makes sense for me. DK Metcalf at 5,700. I said we were going to talk about one of Russ's options. And I'm probably not going to be able to afford Tyler Lockett if I'm doing a Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett stack because I want to pay up for running backs. But, you can do it. I just prefer DK Metcalf at a cheaper price tag at 5,700 versus Tampa Bay. If you couldn't tell, I am spending up for running backs this week, so I'm going to be in this mid/value range for wide receivers this week. Of the passing game for Seattle here, and I'll take the cheap option with DK here. I almost said DraftKings. But Tampa is giving up 43.8 points per game to wide receivers, which is 4th most. And Seattle is the highest total on the slate, and Tampa is elite versus the run, but not so much versus the pass. So I could see Chris Carson maybe struggling a little bit. I don't think he's going to have a terrible game, but I do prefer the passing side for this game. And he's also a big red zone guy. He has 12 targets in the red zone, which is 5th among wide receivers this season. And he also has one of the highest yards per reception on the slate at 17.5 yards per reception. So DK Metcalf, I like his upside here. His price did come up quite a bit, but 5,700, I still don't mind it versus Tampa Bay. He did have 2 touchdowns last week. Did not have a lot of yards, but he was still productive for fantasy purposes. Then another guy that was in my first look video, Danny Amendola at 4,700 versus Oakland. I like him quite a bit, but not to sound like a broken record, but I love getting pieces of this game. I realize that says gamer. maybe he is a gamer. I don't know how good he is at Call of Duty, but I want pieces of this game. And he's seen season high in snaps the past 2 weeks with 71% and 67% of the snaps. He's also been very involved with 19 targets and 16 catches the past 2 weeks, which was good for 17 and 21 fantasy points. So that's pretty darn good for his price tag. Now, I already went over how bad the Raiders' defense is, so I'm not going to repeat it. But Amendola should see more than a handful of targets here in a great game environment, so I do think he's a tremendous value guy to pair with Stafford if we can't afford Kenny G, which we probably won't be able to in, like, say, cash games. But I think Danny Amendola, he's a pretty good value this week, and I think he's pretty safe at 4,700. Hopefully he gets into the end zone, and I think we have another productive day out of him. Then the last wide receiver I want to talk about is Curtis Samuel at 4,300. I think he's going to have some ownership this week. He just seems a little bit too cheap. He did see 11 targets last week, and he's averaging over 7 targets per game on this season. Tennessee is 20th DVOA versus the pass, but they have been a little stingy when it comes to points allowed versus wide receivers. But they did just get absolutely annihilated by Mike Evans last week, so take that for what you will. But he actually is popping up as the number one value guy on my sheet this week. And last week it was Kenny Galladay, so we'll see if it stays hot. He's 1% off DJ Moore's target share on the offense, but leads the team in market share of air yards and weighted opportunity share. So Curtis Samuel at 4,300. I think he's just a nice salary saver to plug in your lineups for cash games or GPPs. Now on to the tight end position, my least favorite position every single week. So based off of the guys I like, I gave you guys a lot of expensive running backs, and I gave you guys some more mid-range to cheap wide receivers. And if I'm paying all the way up for running backs, I'm probably going to have to use a cheaper tight end this week. And I like Jack Doyle here at 3,000 versus Pittsburgh. And I already just said that because I'm trying to fit in guys like CMC and Cook. So I'm going to have to go cheap somewhere. Tight end's a logical place to do that. Hilton and Ebron both didn't practice today as well. I mean, I'm not sure if they're going to miss the game or not, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. If they happen to both miss, I think Jack Doyle becomes an excellent play. He's seen at least 3 targets in every single game since week 2, and he's always involved in some manner in this offense. He has seen 8 targets in a game before, so he is involved. And if those two do happen to miss, I think this would make him one of the top value tight ends by far, and I already like him even if they do play. So if they don't play, obviously I have to like him even more, especially at this price at 3,000. Pittsburgh before last week was giving up the 3rd most points per game, but after facing Miami, they dropped to more mid-pack, but still they're not going to be the best defense versus tight ends. I know they got Mika Fitzpatrick, which does hurt that a little bit, but Jack Doyle, he should be fine at 3,000. It's not like he's breaking the bank, and we're banking on a huge game for him. And some other value tight ends I should mention, Cameron Brate, if he gets to start, Jonah Smith would make some sense, Dallas Goedert as well, so there's just some other cheap guys, but I do like Jack Doyle a lot at 3,000. And the last guy we're going to talk about on this video is Darren Waller at 6,300. If you do want to spend up for tight ends, and just another piece from this Oakland-Detroit game, I apologize, guys, but a lot of my fantasy players are probably going to come from this game. Waller leads all tight ends with a 26% target share, and he's second in market share of the team's air yards at 25%, and a second in weighted opportunity share at 56%. And that's just not on the team. That's just an overall out of all tight ends. And, Oakland loves involving their tight ends there will be no shortage of opportunities with Waller, as is the case every single week. He did see 8 targets last week, only had 2 catches, but did get into the end zone. Detroit is middle of the road versus tight ends, allowing 13 points per game, but I like Waller's chances of obviously he's going to play, of passing that given the game environment and volume and the Vegas total and all that, and just his talent. He's a very good tight end. So Darren Waller, I like him a lot if you're spending up, and that is going to be it for this video. I guess I will mention defense. I'm probably just going to play the Redskins. They're going to probably help me get Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb, those kind of guys. So I'll punt defense, get me 3 points, and I will take that all day at 1,800. I do think they're going to be pretty popular, kind of like the Jets were. They were like 60% the one time when they were 1,500. So Redskins versus Buffalo. Buffalo's got a great defense, not the best offense in the world, so I think that makes sense. So yeah, Redskins defense if I had to make a core play defense. Anyway, guys, that's going to be it for this video. If it was helpful, remember to leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, like I said, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16. If you want access to the spreadsheets, my Slack chat, you can talk to me all day if you want. You can bug me all day. Or if my cheat sheets and all that good stuff. Links available in the description below for my Patreon. And I'll see you guys in the next video.